Hello, St. Paul's. This week, I'm having a conversation with Robbie Ewell, who has been one of the leaders in our Sacred Ground efforts this year. And so I'm going to start by asking Robbie to introduce himself.
Thank you, Penny. Well, my name is Robbie Ewell. My wife and I have actually joined the congregation of St. Paul's way back in 2013. So roughly about for 8 years, we have been attending St. Paul's and joining all of you.
Okay, I'm so glad that you are both with us. And Rocky, of course, is a member of chapter, and I'm very grateful to her for taking on that leadership role. So we started this journey back in, I think we started thinking about the question of race and how we could educate ourselves and grow. I think it was January of 2020. And so it was before we were really conscious that we were about to go into a year of lockdown. And we started, you and I started having conversations about a Lent forum. And that was on Debbie Irving's book, Waking Up White. Do you remember how you were feeling about when we got started on that and what your hopes were?
Well, before I read the book, I was wondering about the title to begin with, but I do remember that for one, it turned out to be a personal journey that someone lent to paper and shared with us their journey and their transformation, if you will, by becoming awakened, realizing something that's been around all along, and acknowledging very much many of the emotions and some of the challenges that, in this case, Debbie Irving went through. I actually thought it was an excellent selection, primarily because it gave permission, if you will, for others who are waking up in some way or capacity, that they actually can realize, maybe I've been there too, maybe I can relate. Or for some, I don't understand this lady. How did she ever walk through life this way, not knowing these things? But it lent itself well, particularly to great conversations. And to be very candid, it was, in my view, you could tell it was somewhat it brought a razor focus to the issue of racism, and at the same time, some introspection by folks in terms of, I'm not racist. I haven't a racist bone in my body. When terms are lifted, such as white privilege or white supremacy, and how it had functioned and continues to function in this society, it put some parties a little bit ill at ease, but others also realized, let's think this through. I think it was a very good way to get the conversation moving. By drawing upon someone else's example and also opening the door to other works of the time. So we, in addition to having a book read on Debbie Irving's work, we were able to include elements from white fragility and also how to be an anti-racist, and a number of other components, including some news clips that brought contemporary context to some of these issues, particularly as we are now currently going through a period of what some would consider our society's racial reckoning, and recognizing some of the, not only the history that we have, but the fact that some of the tragic things are still happening, and we're even running into resistance as an informed society, how to correct and both the larger issues of racism and also how they're impacting us in our individual lives. So to me, I thought it was a wonderful start. It was truly insightful to hear so many different points of view and comments. And I will say one thing for our participants: they are not shy in sharing their opinions, but they are, for the most part, very thoughtful opinions, which parties are also not looking outward, but also inward. So a very good start that kind of set the tone for some other things to follow.
Yeah. I remember when I read Waking Up White, having those aha moments. And I thought the way she wrote that book, it was her own experience, telling the story. And stories, I mean, Jesus showed us that stories are the way that you get under people's skin in a brilliant way. And she wasn't directly confronting us with our own prejudice, but she was sharing hers, and that allowed us to come along the journey with her. And it was, I thought it was a great way to introduce the topic. And then suddenly we were in this lockdown just as Lent was beginning. And so we did a pivot and went into Zoom mode for the Sunday forums. And that meant so many more people could participate. We ended up with over 100 people, and not just close by, but people far away too, who participated in the forum discussions. And so it was an astonishing moment of grace as we started that difficult year, that suddenly we discovered we could reach more people, and we were already focusing on something that was deeply meaningful to our community and to our lives. And so then we wanted to move on to, it was the question that we're coming up to now again, was what do we do? How do we follow this? And we started looking at sacred ground. And that was something that the Episcopal Church was really promoting, this curriculum, this small group, 10-month deep dive curriculum. And I think would you agree that it's really been part of our presiding bishop's focus and his particular charism of lifting up this question of systemic racism so that we can look it in the eye?
Absolutely, I totally agree. And it strikes me that when we even looking at the curriculum for Sacred Ground, it takes a thoughtful, somewhat scholarly look of some of the historical components. And it does, and I think in terms of telling our story, going back to the earlier point, it kind of tells a real story, one that it has some blemishes and some major concerns with it in terms of how this nation got started and continued. And particularly, what I particularly found interesting was racism, of course, was levied at so many different groups at different times to accomplish certain select ends. Mm-hmm. And I think it's certainly, I'm super happy that the bishop has lifted this issue, because in a sense, we cannot really be who we really need to be until we address all of the inequities that we have, and also recognize what, if we're standing on the shoulders of some, how sturdy is that foundation? So I will just offer also that Sacred Ground and Katrina Brown did an excellent job, and also addressing things that I guess as a society we kind of lose sight of. And so if you even look at how Chinese Americans were treated at the beginning of their journey here, and how that has now continued into, unfortunately, other new hate crimes and the like. Of course, the indigenous Americans, the indigenous people who have been here, who before America was the United States of America, and what has happened there, but also how it's been characterized through history. Native Americans also have I'll just put it this way, the attempted genocide toward Native Americans is one of those things that we, instead of learning from it, we had at some point in time just, painted an entire segment of folks as being something other. And that what we brought to the table, meaning we as, I'll just say white America in this case, has in fact, civilized this country in some way. When in fact, the acts that have happened were truly horrific.
Yeah, I think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, just what came through for me as we went through the months, I was in a group with other staff members. It was this piling on. It was one after another, after another, after another minority group, or the indigenous groups who were categorized as less than human in some way and without culture, and that the only culture was white European culture, and that there wasn't anything else. And what we lost out on is tremendous over those centuries, and by dismissing and pushing down and murdering members of other groups of human beings. We all lost a great deal from that. And that really came through for me. And I really hadn't focused on racism as being systemic before we started this project. And it gave me a completely new idea of what racism is. And I wish everybody could go through this program and have their eyes opened. And certainly I've got a huge amount more to learn, and I think we all share that feeling. But we had a lot of people involved, right? A lot of people signed on to these groups.
We did, and frankly, I think we had a total of 110 participants. So we were broken into a number of groups, obviously, roughly about 10 parties, 13 per group, and mostly from St. Paul's, but we had some visitors who joined us because they heard about the buzz, so they joined in. And I know as one facilitator among many, I think collectively we were all very pleased to see how engaged parties were, because to ask people to commit for 10 months, one day a month, for an extended conversation each day of that particular day, is a lot. And there was a lot of prep work. But what I can say, at least I know from the group I worked with, that people were ready to go, ready for the conversation. They literally did as much of the reading and preparation and viewing of videos as they could, had some really hard and strong reactions to them, and actually were able to articulate their thoughts on that in our sessions. And what I would like to just applaud all those who were involved is how giving they were, not just of their time and energy, but really of their thoughts. You know, what they felt about a given work, what they felt about the story that's behind the work. Those things were truly enlightening, and I think, quite frankly, that's what, as a group dynamic, and certainly for listening sessions, if you will, both talking and listening sessions, I would say that St. Paul's operated on a very high level for that, in which our group seemed like they were just thirsty for more information and found some things incredulous that we have to do something about this.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it was like, what? Yeah, it was, that was part of my experience. The how could this be? How could this have come to this? And what on earth can we do? And one of the things I noticed was that there was a spillover from the actual circle discussions to other parts of our life as a parish. And I think of one conversation in our morning prayer group where somebody, a white person, made an innocent comment about people being good at heart, Americans being good people, and then hearing very thoughtful personal testimony from 3 other members of the group, all of whom are people of color, of their experience in different areas, different regions of this country, different times of their lives, when they were dismissed or talked over or considered less than, and the original commenter having a strong reaction, and the next day coming back and saying thank you. And that conversation could not have happened, I don't think, without us being involved in sacred ground and learning how to speak our truth. And I'm so grateful for that, for the influence that sacred ground has had. And I wonder, for you as a St. Paul's parishioner, what has it meant for you to see this happen?
Well, it's, I sometimes, many people, and myself included, sometimes operate on a set of assumptions that most people are like well-informed, they know everything that's going on, and that we sometimes find ourselves around folks that are like-minded. And I would say that's still the case. Okay, so that's reassuring. what parties are not necessarily is, and I will say this, one of the takeaways for me was how the topic, and if you will, of racism um, was something that was tough for some because it's something that it's a topic. It's as if it does not apply to their particular lives because that may be an issue, or maybe there's something related to race that's impacting other people. But when it comes to one's own self-concept, they may say, well, there's not a racist bone in my body. I'm just, I don't see color. Which I say, really? Is that possible? Uh, but, but the takeaway for me was that I think a few folks at least have kind of realized that we all are indoctrinated. We all grew up here. We're indoctrinated in this country with certain attitudes and comments and things that are always in our face, in our stream. And what we are, frankly, now, hopefully at a point where for things that are inappropriate, we are now a little more emboldened, a little stronger, a little more aware that we can stand up against it. We can, if it is something that is harming other folks and is also based upon lies or deceit, that we can actually speak truth to power and make sure that, at least within our own sphere, that whatever we feel is appropriate, that we can do to at least counter that type of action. An example, and these are many of the things that we'll cover when we go further down the road and talk about how to be an anti-racist, but among the items, quite frankly, would be that if just like how not to be an anti-sexist, if something's happening in your sphere, you might want to speak up. You might want to tell parties that this is not acceptable. If things are too intimidating for one to do that, they may also just want to take other measures within their sphere of influence to make sure that people, kind of like that, if you will, inappropriate activity, inappropriate behavior, things that harm other people, just simply is not acceptable. And sometimes if we keep a blind eye to something, we are also allowing it to become part of the acceptable in the public square. And that's what I'm hoping. That's one of my main takeaways, is that just by hearing some feedback on, let's do something with this new knowledge, or let's do something with even old knowledge parties may have known all along. But let's do something that's constructive, that speaks to who we are. Because I think one strong takeaway is that if people were to be asked the question, is this us? Sometimes we sadly have to say, well, I guess if the us is all of us, yes, this is us. We don't want to be able to give that same answer that this is us years from now. We want to make a change and a difference now.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about is how our experience will seep over into other parts of our life as a church. I know that our Women Together group has been intentional about having more diversity among the speakers this year. I think that's one thing. I'm trying to have more diversity in our pulpit and hear different voices. Our formation program, will we be drawing on sources other than white male authors? Our money conversations, there's one of the things that I learned during this process was that a great deal of inherited wealth that people still today get to enjoy stems from slave ownership. And will that have a knock-on effect as people are passing on their inherited wealth, as they become more conscious of how it was ill-gotten? I think it'll be interesting to see how it affects different areas of our life and growth as Christians and as church members. And I wonder, are there pitfalls we should watch out for as we go forward?
Well, that's a tough one. There are many pitfalls, but I would suggest that one thing is to their own self be true. Realize that in many ways, this type of activity is an invitation for us to look inward about ourselves and to, rather than just necessarily feel super comfortable that like, well, I'm perfect, but and my racial perspective is perfect. I'm ready to rock and roll. It's good to kind of like be realistic and think about, are there times when in fact that you may have had or one may have carried uh, thoughts that were both inaccurate and perhaps harmful regarding parties who were different. Um, and and also, quite frankly, one of the pitfalls that we all face is that this topic is so important and we have to address it head on. We have to address it in terms of different racial classifications, if you will, or how parties are identified by race. But obviously, there is a lot of parties who are of multiple races, and sometimes, you know, if the conversation gets a little bit testy, it might be um, it may be a little bit insensitive to those who actually like, well, I'm I'm already, you know, uh, of multiple cultures, and one culture you just offended me on. Okay, so
It's a
um,
complicated path.
yeah. But you know, it comes part and parcel with us being really a global society, and that is really, frankly, without question, that's the way the world is shaping up. That our ability to connect with one another globally, interculturally, is huge. I would say one pitfall, and this is not to say that this hits everyone, but sometimes if we are trying to engage, if we want to insert ourselves into cultures that we have not previously done, sometimes it can be done without intention, but with kind of like a bit of an attitude, almost patronizing, or one's, you know, involvement is that I'm here to fix this thing and I will fix it. Gosh darn it. You know,
So-called
I'm here
savior
now.
complex.
Yes, I'm here now. Everything's going to be just fine. And life is extremely more complex than that. And also, one needs to be kind of whole personally. I would think before inserting oneself into, and in a sense, making some judgments of other cultures.
Mhm.
But if one is to just be genuine and wanting to get to know people better, maybe expanding their circles as it will, but to do it with an open heart and an open mind, that too could be useful. But um, at the heart of this, I would say it's important that as one is, even if they're, I hate to call them a convert, but let's say if someone just recently was awakened, similar to Irvine, she had some pitfalls. She ran into some conflicts primarily because um, she got immersed, and she immersed herself in a manner in which she didn't quite question all of her attitudes and opinions. And
Mhm.
she was very open and telling us about that in her work. Uh, with a more positive outcome toward the end, but there were some growing pains along the way.
Yeah, and
And I
don't we
think
all
that
have
happens for all
those?
of us.
I think about what I'm thinking of as a spiritual discipline now is the intent versus impact
Mm,
question, and learning to have some humility around, if I say something and I don't mean it to be insulting, but somebody experiences it as insulting, I should not try and argue my way out of that. The impact is what counts, and learning is good for me. It's real discipline to learn to say, you know, I honor your discomfort and I'm sorry, without saying, but what I really meant was, um, so that's one sort of continuing piece of
yeah.
education that I know I'm going to be working on.
And I think as human beings, that just to piggyback on your comment, I think we also are so uh, accustomed to thinking we're the good guys in every scenario. And if there's components both in our history and maybe even our current practice as a society that it shows like, well, who's the good guys and who are the, you know, it's like that judgment issue kind of falls apart, and it leaves us basically with an opportunity to see like, well, be careful. And this is, I'm sorry, this is going to be, you did ask what my takeaways and pitfalls might be, But I would say parties should be even more mindful and thoughtful about their sources for information, how they decide to become aware of what's going on, from the news sources to and now online media and podcasts, et cetera. Not saying parties shouldn't have a variety of resources, but if they actually are not necessarily, if select news outlets, for example, have a particular point of view and they rather take you down a rabbit hole as opposed to conveying what's truthful, I think that's a problem. And it's impacted our society in a deep way already, that we have so many sources and that people are sometimes not looking for things that have been are accurate, but actually things that make them feel better.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
we're almost at the end of our time, and I do want to give you a chance to talk about what's next. People, we've been in this deep inner journey, and people what they say, well, so what, and what's next, and you want to talk a little bit about the next steps for our community?
Yes, actually, I'm very excited, along with quite a few other people who are all working to put together Sacred Ground in Action, basically in response to the feedback that we've already heard from those who participated in Sacred Ground. This will be the next thing, and it's actually kind of like a multi-point approach to providing this action. Some will be addressing congregational support elements, and within that, we plan to have a town hall meeting once a month. That town hall meeting will take an even deeper dive into some of the more salient issues that's hitting us with regards to race right now, here and now. So there's, of course, challenges with police engagement with select populations. There's the attacks on things like the ability for everyone to vote, and the basic voter suppression seems to be on the rise. There's also a very great opportunity for us to take a look at the Episcopal Church's audit on this racial climate.
Mm.
And that will give a chance for, in the town hall meeting, for a panel. I'll join the panel in which we get to chat about the findings from the audit, its implications, since it's the Episcopal Church as a larger audit, and maybe discuss the implications of it toward us as here at St. Paul's, here in San Diego.
Wow, that's exciting stuff.
And on top of that, Sacred Ground in Action, the second tier, if you will, peer will be working on educational resources, things that are available to parties. And then there will be further follow-up on the third tier that I think people will find just intriguing as we look at what to do. What can you do as an individual who wants to either be an anti-racist, which is not a bad thing to be, or to, quite frankly, what can you do that you think is constructive in your community, in your circles, in your sphere of influence that can make a difference. And there's another peer that's doing that as well. And they all will be interlinked, and somewhat there will be some opportunity to promote that from the town hall meetings to let party know what other things are happening.
Wow. And the first town hall meeting, I think, is June 13th.
That is correct.
It's a Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. Is that right?
Right after evening song, correct.
And it'll be on Zoom initially, I'm guessing?
I believe the whole thing will be on Zoom. This will be very similar to our Waking Up White, our forum on race, and in which everybody there will be on Zoom. We'll have the panelists also on Zoom as well.
Great. So it's not limiting to people who can get down to the cathedral in the evening. We continue to have that digital reach. It's been such a blessing.
Certainly looking forward to it. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are a few initiatives already in play. I don't think this is Sacred Ground in Action. I think this was in play before. For example, adding to the hypno set, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Yes.
there are very intentional efforts, as you've outlined earlier, that I think kind of suggest the heart of St. Paul. And frankly, if we ask if this is us, we can say very confidently and proudly, yes, this is us.
Yeah, we're about halfway to our goal of buying 200 copies of Lift Every Voice and Sing. So I'm hoping that as the final group wraps up, which I think at the time of recording, there's one more group to wrap up the series. I'm hoping that people who've been involved in the Sacred Ground series will be helping us to get that collection of hymnals, and then we'll be able to broaden our repertoire of worship music, which will be exciting. Yeah. Well, I think we should probably end it there. I'll give you a chance. Final thoughts, final recommendations.
Just thank you for this opportunity. And always is enjoyable talking with you, and to acknowledge that the fact that St. Paul's is moving to another level with Sacred Ground in Action says a lot about this congregation and about how it cares about not just its own self, but the world around us. I'm truly looking forward to having the opportunity to engage further.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Robbie. You've been quite the inspiration and leader in this, and it's always a joy to talk with you and to learn from you. And I look forward to what comes next. And to our congregation and those watching, I will see you on Sunday.
Thank you.